All right, welcome to the Elevate Compliance Podcast special episode. Thank you all for listening in today. I'm really excited to be able to share this fun episode with you today as kind of our season finale for our podcast for season one here. I'm really excited to have two special guests with me today. I've got Jamie DiBease from Day One Marketing, and I've got Parham Nabatian from TheDocSites. We're going to give them each an opportunity to introduce themselves here in just a minute, but this is going to be kind of a fun episode because what we're going to do is we're going to sort of have a not really a debate style, but sort of a moderated question panel style where we're going to talk a little bit about online reviews. We'll talk about the merits of them. We'll talk about the approaches that you can take when responding to online reviews. We're going to get into a little bit of the HIPAA concerns that come along with, responding to those reviews as well. And we'll talk a little bit about, ways to approach responding to positive, neutral, and negative reviews, which is going to be really valuable, especially when you consider that there have been practices in the past who have gotten in big trouble for leaving too much information on an online review. And I will also share that story of the most recent HIPAA violation that came from that as well a little bit later on in the podcast. But before I do that, I want to take a moment to introduce my guests. So first of all, Jamie from Day One, take a moment to introduce yourself, Jamie.
Thanks, Will. Glad to be on your podcast today. My name is Jamie DiBease. I am the owner and chief strategist at Day One. We are a digital marketing agency focused on helping our dental clients gain more of their ideal patients. And mostly what that looks like is coming up with a comprehensive strategy that works for that practice and making it very unique for the types of patients they want.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jamie. Appreciate you being here. And Parham, and I just want to make sure, am I pronouncing your last name correctly? Nabatian, is that right?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, wonderful. Well, go ahead and take a moment to introduce yourself, Parham.
Yeah, I'm with DocSites. We do websites and marketing. We've been working on dentistry for 15 years now from all types of clients where they've either been multi-practice offices or one-off cosmetic focused and bread and butter family general. And we provide really, supportive customer service. You can call us and we answer the phone 9 to 5. We have a lot of experience and we are very much focused on value, right? Clients getting value, as we know dentistry has very high overhead. So we try to work on being a company that does not impact that too much.
Love it. Absolutely. Yep. And same kind of approach that I take with Elevate, like you said, try not to break the bank too much while providing exceptional service, which is always great. So, well, awesome. Well, thank you both for being here. As I said, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the questions here. So obviously, when we're talking about online reviews and responding to them, it's a hot topic, especially in the day and age of, digital responses and technology. And it's one of the most common ways that a patient will let you know how their experience was in the practice, right? A patient is far less likely to call you and complain than they are to go and leave a bad review. Alternatively, I think they're also more likely to leave a good review than they are to call you and tell you how great you were, but sometimes that does happen. So the idea behind responding to the reviews is we want to make sure that we come across as responsive, but not necessarily defensive, especially in the event of a negative review. But we have to be really careful about the information that we leave. So what I want to ask first, Jamie, I'm going to throw this question to you first. When responding to online reviews, whether positive, neutral, negative, kind of, whatever the sort of response is, what should be the dentist's primary goal? What should be the goal of the practice? And should their approach differ based on, the type of review that they receive?
The primary focus in responding to a review is going to be the patient's privacy. That's where it has to start. Mm-hmm. But there's there's a tension between legal requirements of HIPAA protecting personal information, mm-hmm. privacy, etc. And then there's also the tension of the relationship that the practice has with that patient, but also with future patients. And so we encourage our clients to respond to every review. Now there's definitely going to be some exceptions. There's
Sure.
some people out there that are absolutely just crazy in their reviews, and crazy. You don't need to highlight crazy, but we encourage people to respond to every review with a HIPAA compliance in mind, but also that relationship component. And some practices feel that tension more on the legal side, and they won't respond, or they will respond just acknowledging that there's a review. Other practices feel more on the attention to be relating to the patient, and they will respond in an exceptionally personal way. And so it is a challenge for the practice because there really isn't exceptionally clear guidelines for them to follow. Even the ADA site warns people about it, but never says you shouldn't. In fact, they then go on to give you examples of how to respond with a less riskier way. So there's definitely some area for ambiguity for a practice in making a decision, but we encourage all of our practices to respond.
Okay. Yeah, and so Parham, in sort of follow up to that, and any notes that you have or comments that you have, I would love to hear them. Also, do you see from your side of things, do you see a value in responding to positive reviews, or are you kind of more on the side of, maybe approach the negative reviews? What's your sort of take on what Jamie just said?
There can be a value to responding to reviews, right? I mean, there's some people in search engine optimization, right? Jamie knows it really well. I know it really well. We've been around. There's, studies and places that show that, hey, there's a big value to responding, right? Search engine optimization is to show up higher on the Google Maps, right? So you're replying to Google reviews so that you show up higher. That's why Jamie would recommend it, right? And that's why, say, I would recommend it, right? I've just seen too many cases where clients, and I'm not trying to bash clients here or any dental offices,
Sure.
they don't have their systems and their ducks in a row enough as an all-around practice that I like recommending it or even saying it, right? Because I'd rather them do other things for SEO benefits that take up their time and their staff's time than to reply to every review, because there's too many gray areas. And now all of a sudden, one time you make one mistake and it's not a good situation, right? But if your staff and you and your team are all have the policies, the guidelines, you've met with a will, you've followed the Elevate compliance methods, right?
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, then by all means and attack it, but like at the end of the day, I just need those ducks in a row. And I think there's and now we could get into a marketing combo. There's other things that you could put your time into that will help you with SEO internally as a practice. And sometimes maybe thanking them offline shows a little bit of a more value, right?
Sure. Yeah, so when you're responding to someone and you're thanking them offline, obviously I would assume that from the marketing standpoint, Jamie, that the only risk that really runs is other people don't see it, right? So obviously it will impact SEO, but it's I'm sure for the patient, especially in a positive review, probably pretty nice to hear directly from the practice, right? A special thank you. So Parham, real quickly to follow up on that. So what types of content or messaging should a dentist include in a response to build rapport and address their concerns, in a professional way without compromising that professionalism? Is there an approach that you would take, and how would you approach it differently from positive and negative?
So if they get a negative review, I honestly feel like if you get a negative review, this is my opinion, but I could be wrong. I just think you should kind of let that one go and get more positive reviews. I think sometimes when you get into it and it's not like, even if you come up, you wrote some really good boilerplates, right? Or even if you follow up the ADA, that doesn't really, like, someone that's not coming to you because of that negative review, right? Why would you reply, right? Let's take a step back. You reply because you want someone that's looking up your office that ends up reading that negative review to say, wait, hold on, there's a second side to this, right?
Sure. Yep.
I don't know if quality patients spend that much time reading, like going to that one negative review and saying, oh, the practice says this boilerplate response, now I'm changing my mind, You know what I mean? I just don't feel that way. And if you get into the details, you get into trouble.
Yep.
So what? You can't say, hey, you came in with, recessed gums and every dental issue in the book, and we had to recommend this, and now you're complaining that we're trying to charge you for a deep cleaning, right? Those are common negative reviews, and a lot of common negative reviews, and I'll end on this, isn't actually about the practice the work that they do. It's about like
Right.
a staff member. It's about the
Hmm.
wait time. It's about, so what are you going to do, you know?
So, in response to that, Jamie, I'd love to know your thoughts on that because I know you, like you said a minute ago, generally tend to encourage responses to pretty much every review. So, do you find that it's more important when a practice is just starting to respond to like the negative reviews? Because I think what Parham is getting at makes a lot of sense, especially if the practice has been there for 20 years and you have hundreds of reviews. Maybe that one-star review where the person goes off and kind of goes crazy maybe isn't as important to respond to. Do you find it more important when a practice is trying to grow initially, or do you kind of believe that it's always, it always has its merits?
I think that the emphasis there's a greater emphasis for practices that are starting out, particularly until you start getting a couple hundred reviews. I think that that's really important because a negative review will be one negative review, while it may hurt somebody's feelings, and I can understand that, is not going to make any difference when you start getting a couple hundred reviews. Four
Sure.
or five negative reviews really doesn't. However, if you're getting negative reviews sequentially, there definitely is going to be a problem with that. So I think that there really isn't a straightforward answer as far as yes, you need to, regardless of every single practice, you need to respond to every negative review in a similar way. My suggestion to our practices, my encouragement to them, is to, if somebody is absolutely gone off the deep end in their review, ignore it. There's nothing you're going to do, and people are smart enough that when they look at that, and if you're a 4.9 or 5-star rated with 300 reviews and somebody leaves you a 1-star review and complains about how long they had to wait in the office, they're going to know
Yeah.
it's that person. But if you've got, I'm thinking of one of my clients right now that has about 45 reviews, relatively new practice, and they had a 1-star review that they can't attribute to any patient whatsoever. This 1-star review is having a massive problem at the moment on their rankings, and so how do you encourage a place like that? So we don't even know if it's a real patient, not a real patient. He can't attribute it to anyone. So there are situations, I think, where we have to exercise caution, but I do encourage responses. So when we're talking about 1-star reviews, as Parham has mentioned, like someone's incredibly negative, pointing out some issues, a lot of times there's nothing you can say, not only because of HIPAA compliance, but what are you going to do to win them back?
Right.
And so at that point, yeah, you move on. But if it's a 3-star review, maybe even if there's something in there, a practice should have a plan in place for when there's an appropriate, to come up with an appropriate response that might be something along the lines of, we treat, let's say there was a complaint about weight, which is, as Parham said, is a very common situation. We schedule all of our patients to be such and such a time, or the doctor schedules the patients so that he can see each one of them appropriately, and just leave it at that. Thank you for your review. Don't say we're sorry you didn't have a good experience, but just to leave something, some type of response to say that you're paying attention. And for me, going back to this tension with, is it legal? Is it relational? It really is a preference for the practice. How important is it to them? As Parham mentioned, there's an SEO component. There's a lot of competing interests in this, and so a practice in a highly competitive area, one little nudge or something along those lines. But I think it's important to put in context. A review doesn't really matter if your goal is to get 100 or 200 in a year. And so that should really be the practice's strategy, not focus as much on how do we respond, but how do we get more positive reviews. But I do encourage them to respond every time that it makes sense for them to respond.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. All right. Well, we're just going to take just a very short, quick break and take a pause, and then we will be back in a moment to continue our discussion. Elevate Compliance is a proud sponsor of Dental Nachos. If you're not a Dental Nachos member, joining the Facebook platform is free and provides access to an amazing group of dental professionals from all areas of the industry. Just search Dental Nachos on your favorite social media to get connected with great vendors, speakers, and dental professionals who are waiting to share their knowledge and expertise with you. All right, welcome back to our podcast episode here with Jamie DiBease and Parham Nabatian. So what we're talking about is online reviews and kind of discussing the merits of responding to positive versus negative reviews, and how we have to be careful about the information that we share. And to kind of piggyback off of something that Jamie just mentioned, when it comes to responding to the reviews and being as impersonal as possible when you leave that information is vital, because not only do you run the risk of upsetting the patient, but it's also a major HIPAA violation if you do leave information, anything that could be considered protected health information, PHI, under HIPAA. And just before we get back into discussing here, just to share a little story with our listeners about a major significant example. There was a dental practice in Texas. I will remit the name of the practice in this podcast episode. But they were cited in 2016, $10,000 by HIPAA because of a response to a negative Yelp review left by a patient. And while the review itself had been removed by the time the violation was, the penalty was imposed, so there's no way for us to know exactly what the language was in that response at this point. They did leave a lot of patient information in the review, and the dentist actually got quite combative with the patient. And the problem with that is, not only do you run the risk of giving the patient more ammunition for them to file a complaint, which is exactly what happened, which is exactly what resulted in that $10,000 violation, but you also escalate the issue with the patient, which obviously, in today's day and age, anytime we can de-escalate a situation, you just never know what people are capable of, and you don't want to throw gasoline on the fire, right? So to kind of talk a little bit about that, and this question I'm gonna throw over real quickly to Parham. So question, in response to what Jamie was mentioning a few minutes ago before we took our break, and in response to the story that I just shared about that dental practice, what are the potential risks of escalating the situation? Kind of elaborate a little bit on what we've been discussing here in terms of the dangers of leaving information or being too personal in a response.
I mean, here's the thing, like, even if you write something personal on a positive review, it's led to negative situations, right? I think at the end of the day, we are all patients of any healthcare provider, right? We don't want our healthcare provider to put anything out there, and that's the bottom line, and you have to respect that, and there's a reason these laws were made, right? And I think in general, just don't put anything online out there about patients, right? Unless, the only time I think it's okay is if you do, high-end case treatment work and you get release forms and you tell stories about that. But the rest of it, where they write a review and you go in there and you say, Jill, I'm so happy we were able to fix your gap tooth and all that stuff, that's not your job. You have so many different priorities as a dental office. And I also think the other thing is, I'm a big person on measuring time, right? Like, I'm a work smart, not hard person. And this is where, like, I kind of really like Jamie's feedback, because, we kind of want our offices to be more active online, right? And responding to reviews does make it an easy way, because, we ask them to do other stuff that take more time and effort, and they don't want to do it, right? So, but in this case, it's kind of like, where else can you put your effort that will help your practice than this? And I think I don't want these offices getting in trouble. Everyone's a mark right now, in this current society. And it's like, I'm worried about everyone. People are putting their blood, sweat, and tears. And I just tell them, stay away. Like, stay away from the platform, stay away from the Facebook groups. Like, I saw someone recently say, hey, I got badgered in a Facebook group, right? And what should I do? And it's like, even then, like, heck yeah, it's Facebook platform, it's not yours. Go in there and tell them, like, I like standing up for myself, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, you're not going to win in any way.
Right.
Like, you're just not going to win. And then these people bring their cousins and their sisters and their, we're getting into the nitty gritty here, but it's true, they do it.
Yep. Yeah, and so obviously we've explored a little bit about the repercussions of leaving private information on a review like that. And, the HIPAA violation aside, I think that's a really good point that you make there, in that, my dad used to say, and it's a little bit of a misnomers quote here for what we're talking about, but my dad always used to tell me when I was growing up, don't argue with an idiot, because people watching the argument won't be able to tell who's who. That's
Right.
kind of the whole thing. And not that patients or practices are idiots. Again, like a little bit of a adjustment to that statement, but arguing online is pointless, because whether it's, whether you have a patient who leaves a blatantly inaccurate review about your practice, if you try to go in and argue with them, what are you really accomplishing, right? All you're doing, again, is throwing the gasoline on the fire, and you're not really getting to the root of the issue. So in that case, leaving a more impersonal, we always strive to give a great patient experience, something really just simple and laid out like that is a way to show, again, that you're responsive but not defensive. And I think that's a really important point to bring up. So, Jamie, question for you. In a situation where you have a potentially misleading or inaccurate response, how would you coach somebody on what to say? Because I know I kind of gave just a little bit of an answer there, but is there any other approach that you might take if someone just literally was lying in a review, or maybe, as Parham mentioned, way back when we first started the podcast, that there's two sides to every story. What one person perceives as what happened is not necessarily always the truth. So what would be some advice that you might give to a client who's wondering about how to respond to at least from their perspective, inaccurate review?
Well, I think that this is a really important part of responding to reviews. Is there's this tendency for each of us to either want to set the record straight, or to make sure that we're getting the truth across. Mm-hmm. And I think that has to be tempered with the guidelines that we're following with HIPAA, and especially patient privacy. I'll give you a great example. This is just something that happened very recently. We have a dentist who received a positive review. It wasn't even a negative review. It was a positive review, 5 stars, and it was a glowing review. But the patient mentioned that they had gone in for treatment and mentioned a dollar amount that was not the dollar amount that the treatment cost. In fact, it was significantly higher. Don't know if there was an extra zero added, not sure. But the doctor reached out to me and said, should we respond? And I said, there's no way you can respond by saying a dollar amount. No, that's not how much the treatment cost. It's this
Right.
amount, because you are clearly indicating that the person received it. So in that case, all we did is we just said you should just say thank you, basically. So the challenge is, how do you set aside that personal desire to set the record straight? And I think that there's a way to do that, and that's to recognize that you as the practice owner, the dentist, you are not going to please everybody. And as hard as that is, it's part of business. And you can do everything right, and a patient can still not like you.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that takes a certain amount of thick skin, if that's a good phrase to use, to be able to get to that point where it's okay. You're not looking at that person, and the realization that I want to just take a small step back here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about responding to Google reviews or Yelp reviews. It's how do you respond when if you're doing social media and people respond negatively to you on social media. I mean, in some cases you can hide a comment. Do you want to hide a comment? Do you let others defend you? It's very pervasive. And the HIPAA guidelines really don't speak to how do you clearly respond in situations like this. And most people are going to err on the side of, I'm just going to not set the record straight. I always, and this is someplace that Parham and I are completely in agreement on, I never tell a client, say what happened.
Of course, yeah.
Never. Like, I had one dentist that wrote me this very lengthy paragraph to convince me, to make me know, like, this is what happened. I'm like, I appreciate it, Doc, but you are not going to post this. You cannot post this
Yeah.
on there. And so I do think that's the challenge, is just relinquishing that okay, I need to set the record straight. And some cases, as I mentioned earlier, you just don't respond. But whenever possible, in a way, boilerplate, we always strive to give our patients a great experience. Just leave it at that. And that's about it.
Yeah. So, what are some best practices? And this is something that I'll throw to Parham first, but I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this question. What are some best practices for de-escalating a potential conflict on a forum like that? And this doesn't necessarily have to just be, Google and Yelp, the sort, or health grades, the kind of, sort of typical ones that we think of. This could also be, as you mentioned, Jamie, on Facebook or wherever, right? What are some ways that you can de-escalate a situation if you have a patient who is upset? Maybe not so much in a private way, because obviously you can always reach out to the patient and try to de-escalate a situation that way. But any thoughts about how you might approach this Parham in a public way where you can de-escalate without giving too much information? I know it's a very, very, very tricky, line to straddle there. So any advice or thoughts on that?
If either of us give general advice on this, we're putting someone at risk and in trouble. I'm
Fair
just going
enough.
to put that out there. I think every case is different, and I'm a big believer in dentists become dentists because they want to help people, right? And of course, it pays or paid well, according, and I think that's the goal of someone opening up an office, right? Move on to the next person that wants your service. Ask the people that are happy with you to introduce you to more people. I know that's not the answer you want, but
I think it's a great
I'm
answer,
I'm
actually.
never I'm never of the belief that like anything happens good online, right? Like there's a while people got on Facebook and said, I like this politician and I like that politician and it got crazy, right? And then now it's like years later we're all realizing we all just want to be the same thing. We all want to be happy and this and that, and that patient had a bad experience at your office. If they're not answering your calls to make it right, and you feel like, and I always say don't always try to make it right, because this is another question, but you're like, without calling them, sometimes they're not a fit for you. Sometimes
Sure.
you can go, what are you going to do? Go beg someone that's not reasonable to do the right thing? No. Move on. Get a lot, and reviews help with marketing and SEO. Like, there's people that call me and say, hey, Parham, I want to run Google ads, and they have like a 4.3 out of 5, right? We're not going to win the Google ads unless you start giving out free dentistry left and right, right? That's why we're here. We're talking from a marketing angle,
Hmm.
but sometimes don't think of marketing as everything, right? Move on to the other elements of reviews as your marketing as everything, right?
Right.
'Cause us marketers, we push that to the dentist. Get more reviews. You'll show up higher on Google Maps. It'll help convert more patients, and they hear it. Then it creates this anxiety with them, right? So I'm giving you a long answer. No, there's
That's okay.
nothing you should do online to de-escalate.
Okay. Yeah. And Jamie, are you pretty much in the same boat?
Yeah, I agree with Parham. There is no good way that you can de-escalate anything online. I think that there are some opportunities for a dentist, and he or she is going to have to determine that on their own, where they may reach out to the patient offline, but that's really a personal choice. Some people will actually view that as even more of an escalation
Hmm.
by you reaching out to them, because they know that you're reaching out to them based upon what they posted.
Sure.
There are some and again, that's going to have to be exercising wisdom. I do
Hmm.
have examples of where some of our clients have had very negative reviews, and what the dentist did was they just wrote a letter to the patient, just in their own personal, not necessarily apologizing,
Hmm.
because they didn't think they did anything wrong, but just
Hmm.
letting them know that they appreciate them being a patient, and that they appreciated that they were willing to share their feedback, and that was it. Just to do things like that, I do let all of our dentists know everything that you say. Just imagine it having to come before you at some point, and you need to defend that in a court of law. So whether it's print, whether it's a voice recording, whether anything like that. So just imagine everything is something that could be used as evidence. So you want to make sure that you keep that legal, again, going back to that tension, there's that legal
Yeah.
piece in mind. We do have, and I'll just, to finish answering your question, we do have some of our dentists, and this is not something that I would suggest. We do have some of our dentists who absolutely don't care what a patient thinks, and they will not blast them online, but they will immediately write a dismissal letter. You leave me a negative review, I'm dismissing you. And they have no problem in doing that. That doesn't show up online, but they've let me know that that's the case.
Love
Yeah.
that.
And yeah, and that comes with a host of tricky, that can be tricky in and of itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the approach. And I think probably, just to be clear for anybody who's listening, Jamie's probably not necessarily endorsing that, right?
No, no, I'm not. I'm
Because
just saying that some of them,
yeah.
that's the extreme. That's the
Yeah,
extreme.
yeah. So, and obviously the danger that comes along with that is a different form of escalation. Even though it's not necessarily visible in the public forum, that can also have some repercussions as well. Any other thoughts, Parham, on what Jamie was talking about there?
No, and I think the biggest thought is having someone like you on their side. I think that's the bottom line, is that us marketers, we're here to help with certain things, and they need you. They need you, they need the other people that know all the compliance elements. And, at the end of the day, like you said something great, like that dismissal letter leads. I'm a big believer in people are unhappy, let them move on. You move on. I promise you, in a year or two, you won't remember that review,
Yeah.
and it won't haunt you again, as long as you're getting the right patients in. That's the goal, and that's why, I'm a big believer in, like, focusing on getting the right patients in. That should be your goal in marketing. Jamie mentioned it at the beginning, and if you do that, you're going to be happy long term.
Awesome. All right. Well, the last question that I have before we get ready to wrap the episode up is kind of a bonus question. And this is one that I didn't throw out to you before, either of you, before the podcast, because I wanted to see what your reactions would be if I caught you off guard just a little bit. I know how I would approach this, but I would like to hear both of you how you would approach this. So let's say, put yourselves in the shoes of the dentist for just a minute, and you receive a review. And let's just say that the name of your practice is Johnson Family Dentistry, just something simple, right? And you get a review from a Johnson Family Dentistry in another state, and they leave you a really, really negative review complaining about all the things. They include the hygienist's name. You don't have that hygienist in your office because this is a different practice. So Jamie, I'll throw it to you first. You get this review. How do you respond to this, knowing that this person is in fact not a patient in your office?
This is so ironic. I just had this.
Oh,
I'm
really?
dealing with this right now, just
Okay.
right now. So this is what we told the dentist to do. In this case here, it was a negative review, and so all we said was that in this particular case, they should respond saying, "Did you mean this review for us, or this other practice that is a similar name?" What they wanted to do was say, "We do not have a patient. We don't show you in our records. We have no patient of your name, etc." And I said, "Nope, you don't. Just say, was this review intended for us or for another practice?" Now, if it was intended for them, then it's that at least you showed that you responded to it.
Mm-hmm.
But we've also had the situation where there's a very positive review, and we told them, "Thank you. Your response should be, 'Thank you for leaving us this review. Was this intended for us or this other practice?'"
You don't just
Just
let them leave it and let it
just
add to
let
their
them
five
leave it
star.
and let the other person deal with it. One side note is, and this you didn't mention this, but I'll let Parham have a little bit more of a play on this if you want to do a follow up. Is Google has a mechanism. It's not a good mechanism, but has a mechanism for flagging reviews. And so there is an option where if there's a review that you think doesn't belong to you, but it's Google, and they're not often always going to listen to what you have to say.
Sure.
But that might be a mechanism. But yeah, we would just say, and I just told him this, we'd say, ask the person if it's for this office or for that office, and just leave it at that.
All right. Anything to add to that, Parham?
No, that's a great response, and yeah, the mechanism is not great. I'm pretty sure it's AI now at this point. So you're praying to the AI gods to flag it. But I will add that if you have, try to have as many people as you know flag the review. That can possibly make an impact on it, right? Not, we don't know for sure, but we've seen some reviews taken off. And I would tell you, Will, I would have someone contact you and say, hey, here are my options on what I want to write. And now I know Jamie has a great response for that. Here's an option. Can you confirm based on the laws that I can write this response?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, again, thanks for throwing it back to me there a couple of times. I do appreciate that. And for anybody who is listening, obviously, you know who I am, you know what we do. And this is our bread and butter. Dealing with HIPAA is exactly what we do. So if there is anything that I can do to help anybody listening to this, please reach out, because that is what we are here for. So, all right, well, great. Thank you guys both so much. Before we wrap up, I just want to let our listeners know that we are going to be offering a special little freebie as part of this episode, and that is our boilerplate response template. We're going to make it available upon the release of this podcast episode, so you will have access to that. You can get it from Jamie, you can get it from Parham. All of us will have it accessible in our various social media, on our websites, things like that. Wherever we offer those types of things, we'll have them available. But Jamie, Parham, thank you both so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here with me.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Will.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks very much for listening to this special episode of the Elevate Compliance podcast. As I said, this sort of wraps up our season. Very excited to be starting season 2 in a few months. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you back then. Take care.